When boys who don't receive help, like girls, they have to adapt. They have to hide. They just have to get through it somehow. And yes, some boys can buy into the patriarchy and lose their much younger heart space in place of anger, power, and maybe some entitlement. Some boys want nothing to do with all that and find themselves in what I call the masculine gray area. This is a really important piece to this video. So let's meet Joe. Here's a quick case study about a man named Joe. FYI, this is intense kind of stuff concerning childhood trauma. Joe grew up with a mother who was highly narcissistic and who was married to Joe's father, who was either distant, shut down, or enraged most times. Joe's father was physically terrifying. Joe's mother was provocative, and she would wind up Joe's father, who was emotionally limited and very codependent. She would caustically criticize the father in front of Joe in an unrelenting way until Joe's father exploded and would start throwing things and punching walls. The parents were trauma bonded and fused in toxic dynamics. Joe's mother would then seek out comfort from Joe, her little boy, as early as 4 years old in this ongoing cycle with the parental kind of mess. The fights would last for hours, sometimes a week. Joe deeply hated his father and was more attached to his mother, who would only connect with him when she needed care. When Joe was in distress outside of the family stuff, she neglected him and made things about herself if he needed her. Joe's mother was emotionally abusive in consistently telling him that women are always right and men are always the abusers to be protected from. But Joe was also like a man to be, which caused deep shame in him that men are always bad is what Joe absorbed as a little boy. Joe's mother would also get enraged and break down on him when she felt that Joe wasn't in tune with her in what she was feeling and what she needed in her day-to-day life. So Joe became hypervigilant about what women were feeling because he was responsible for their feelings. It's like his conditioning. Joe's mother would also overshare. She complained about her in-laws, her sisters, her own parents. No one was good enough, and it was awkward for Joe to see those family members during holidays, and Joe's mother especially complained about his father's family. She would also tell Joe about how her friends were letting her down, and then this is intense here, trigger warning. She would tell Joe that her sex life could be better. Joe had to take all of this in because he was in his mother's world, not his own. So what happened to Joe as he grew up into a man? Joe hated all things masculine, therefore hating himself subconsciously. Joe felt anxious around other men, and he was aloof around them. He could only make friends with other men and boys who also kind of hated masculinity. Joe's main motivation in life was to not upset women, especially girlfriends, but also waitstaff and teachers and strangers, where upsetting a woman means to be abusive in Joe's belief system. Good potential women partners would not go on a second date with Joe because to them, he kind of felt empty and too people-pleasing. His shame was visible. He was also anxious, had an anxious, preoccupied attachment style that women would feel from him and didn't want to have to take all that on. So there was no really second dates for Joe. And abusive women could take advantage of Joe. Dysfunctional women liked him because he could be like a parent to them. Joe only knows how to relate to a woman by helping them and trying to get them to tolerate him. Let me know if that feels familiar to what we just talked about with Joe's mother. Joe's trauma from his mother specifically made him inauthentic, which isn't Joe's fault. It's actually very common for childhood trauma. Joe shames himself for his feelings. When he feels lust or frustration or sadness, he's supposed to be positive all the time and not threatening in any way, and male feelings are kind of threatening. Joe gets enraged, though, when he hears that pets, women, and children are harmed, like in the news or whatever in his community. It's the only real feeling that Joe really allows himself or that he's in touch with. Joe feels intense shame about sex and the role of men during sex, and his partners feel this shame and they feel that distance from him. Joe can find himself in relationships with women that are like his mother, or in short relationships with women who see that he's nice and he's sweet, but he's not in his body and he's not with his own authentic thoughts. They just don't really feel connected to someone who isn't comfortable in his own skin as a man. Joe eventually married a very self-consumed woman who he is always in trouble with. Let me know if you relate to that. I'm going to say that again. He married a self-consumed woman or partner who he is always in trouble with. And like many childhood trauma survivors, he replicated what his parents, specifically his mother, modeled. The idea of leaving makes Joe feel like he is a perpetrator and abandoning a woman who at the end of the day doesn't really care about him. His feelings or how she makes him feel are not on this woman's radar. And to Joe, hurting a woman is his personal nightmare related to his parents, so he remains very much stuck in that relationship. Most importantly, and this happens to women and all types of folks as well, is that Joe is caught between hating his masculinity, but also being a man and being human. What would happen in his marriage if he voiced frustration about how he was being treated? How do you think that that would go? The abusive wife or partner would most likely construe Joe's frustration for violence, and they would shame Joe for a normal emotion due to probably her trauma, most likely. This also confirms inside for Joe that he is bad and men are bad, so that emotions have to die or they have to go underground. So that's kind of the case study of Joe, and that's just one of many different scenarios or outcomes when a boy is raised by a toxic mother. Joe could have gone the other way and felt more connected with his emotionally unstable father and learned to hate women through the father instead of being terrified about upsetting them. Joe could have also, as a young boy or adolescent, recognized that both of his parents were ridiculous and unsafe, and he maybe detached from himself and from them and from the world. He could have become really isolated with a dismissive, avoidant attachment style instead of his anxious, preoccupied attachment style. Every child is going to have their own strategy in an unsafe family. What the case study does highlight is just one way of having an abusive mother affects how a man feels about himself, how he relates to his partners, and what childhood trauma beliefs still run him in his adult life. And most importantly, to put it bluntly, his baggage about masculinity in context of his mother. So that's the story of Joe, from his childhood abuse, from just focusing on his mother, to what his adulthood would look like in struggling with healthy masculinity and self-work. Can you relate to Joe's story in any way if you get the gender stuff like off the table? Even if you're not a man or if you don't identify as masculine in any way, these themes are universal. And if we can look at how adults were not safe as children, we as a society can kind of jumpstart some missing compassion, and that doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. What I mean by that is chances are the Andrew Tates of the world or men engaging in highly destructive, toxic masculinity are probably not going to seek out this video. If they did, what do you think that they would say about a video like this, about processing a boy's abuse in context of his toxic mother? But this video could be for them when their trauma catches up to them, and trauma always catches up to us, is what I'm trying to say. The video is going to be more applicable to men who are curious about what happened to them in childhood and can openly feel or discuss that masculinity is a highly complicated and painful thing to reconcile or reinvent within themselves. What is actually the goal that I think, and it was for me, given who my parents were, specifically my mother, is to reinvent and reclaim our masculinity. If you don't know me, I'm Patrick Tian, MSW, and this channel is all about childhood trauma, specifically from family of origin as a system, as well as discovering ways to recover for better mental health. And before I start, while any childhood trauma survivor can be exposed to toxicity in childhood by a parent, it's not what we would have chosen as children or adults to struggle with these problems. So when I say a toxic mother and son dynamics, I'm not saying that it's your fault as a son or that you're responsible for a mother's mess or legacy that she has with her children. I am saying that because of unfinished unconscious business that we have with our mothers, we can really get caught up in toxic dynamics with people in our present lives and really struggle with our sense of self. Which leads us to the first lasting problem, which is we need to address that we can end up in toxic adult relationships in our present lives due to having a toxic parent. That's the part that we really need to get real about and kind of work our way out of. Also, I'm listing what I've seen in 14 years of private practice as a group therapist, as an individual therapist, as a couples therapist, and nearly 30 years in my own recovery in general. But here about this video, you're the expert. This is your process, and I'm just listing some patterns that I've seen in my work, and you don't really have to agree with them. So as a male, I've experienced both a toxic mother and a toxic father, and I've gone through the process of unpacking how a toxic mother impacts one's sense of masculinity, and it's way more impactful than we actually think as men. A little bit about this series. So this video is part of a series that I'm doing on the impact of abusive parents in terms of gender. My last video was on toxic fathers and the impact they have on daughters. And in this video, we're going to explore what a toxic mother's impact is on a son. While the video title seems exclusive for men, it's really for everyone. If you're a man and you want to identify issues with an abusive mother, this will be helpful. If you're a woman and you want to understand maybe your partner, your brother, your father, or any man that had a difficult mother, this will also be helpful, I believe. And regardless of your sexual identity and preferences, everyone can benefit from exploring how an abusive mother can impact a son. And to overly simplify mothers like our fathers, they can impact someone on the spectrum of either being too aggressive as mothers or not being aggressive enough as mothers. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm voicing this in mostly a cisgender framework. But if you're queer, I know it's hard, but try to not get caught up in the standard plus and minus mother-son stuff. If you're a gay man, the effect of a toxic mother is still going to be the same if you were straight. If you're trans and you no longer identify as a son or a boy, a toxic mother will still affect your relationships. I know it's confusing because I'm being really gender specific with this video, but it's also a fluid in terms of the impact, in terms of how our partners trigger us. If you're a trans woman, and now dating someone who is non-binary, the gender-specific terms in the video don't really matter. Your partner is still going to trigger you to stuff about if you had an abusive mother, and your inner child will project that abusive mother in all kinds of relationships. So there's going to be 2 more videos in this series. There's going to be toxic fathers and the impact on sons, and there's also going to be toxic mothers and the impact on daughters. So let's get into the big 3 lasting problems in having a toxic mother for sons. Number 1 is, most importantly with a toxic mother, sons tend to get stuck in replicating dynamics in their relationships, mainly their romantic ones. This will involve projection. What that looks like is dating a specific kind of dysfunctional person, giving up power or defaulting towards women or taking care of them or others to avoid being in trouble. Another example of this is trying to make a woman stay by being a perfect man. Another is trying to get an aloof or moody woman to see you or tolerate you, like we saw in the case of Joe. Another example is being extremely dysregulated around women and losing your goodness or your masculinity around women. So a man can kind of control a woman aggressively for fear of abandonment in context of a loss of specialness that can happen in replicating these dynamics. Another weird example is a man can also not trust women, as men can often project their manipulative, abusive mother onto all women, as we saw in the case of women with toxic fathers. A really important piece here. If you spend a lot of time thinking about women in general being hypocritical, that might be a sign or projection of this replication that I'm talking about. I'm not saying that some women aren't manipulative. There are all kinds of manipulative people out there. But notice this pattern within yourself if you tend to seek out how all women are hypocritical on some level or manipulative on some level. Replicating dynamics is simply trying to fix the interpersonal trauma that we had with our mother through different people in our present life. Trying to get a woman to see you as inherently good when you maybe had a mother who hated men and set you up for that kind of baggage because you were a man to be, a man in the making as a little boy. All of these examples of replication are most importantly that our inner child projects early dynamics with our mother onto women or onto our partners. That's kind of how it works for everyone who didn't grow up in safety like I did, or maybe what you did too. Like it's your job to maybe rescue her or rescue a partner, or again, that all women are manipulative or all women are fragile, so you cannot show your emotions with them, like in the concept of being real means to be a perpetrator like we saw with Joe. Like being with an emotionally immature mother, like you can't be real with her because that'll cause her to kind of break down and crash out. The second piece of the big three lasting problems is you're currently still struggling with a toxic mother in your present life and the mess that comes with that. Do you still have to chase your mother to connect? Does she still hold you to impossible standards? Does she blame you for your emotions or terrify you or make you feel excessively guilty? Does she behave with immaturity and create chaos or drama? Does she drain your energy? Is she a stranger? Like, does she put in the work to get to know you as a son? Is she a mess that you have to help out all the time? Are you her rescuer or her parent? How does she behave around the people in your life? Your partner, your children? Might she be jealous of those relationships or totally aloof to them, but she's not really in the role of a healthy mom or a mother-in-law or a grandmother to the people around in your life? Now, the third most important lasting problem is how a son feels about himself, our self-esteem, our self-worth, our sense of self. As a society, we still don't recognize how boys who become men are influenced by an abusive mother. And yes, a father too, and that's going to be coming in a later video. The examples of that are, do you still struggle to feel lovable or worthy? Has your worth ever only been based upon how you look or your sexual performance as a man? Do you hide or disregard your emotions for fear of how they're interpreted by a woman? Are you uncomfortable about your masculinity in context of your mother? Do you isolate or chase connection in fear of abandonment? Do you people please or lessen yourself outside of like normal courting, like wanting to put your best foot forward? Parents have a lot of power, if not all the power, to tell their children who they are, either directly or through neglect. But deep in our core, how an abusive mother felt about us is how we feel about us as men, but toxic people no longer get to tell us who we are. Remember that. So for the men watching, these are common issues when we are raised in an unsafe household, whether it's a blatantly abusive system or kind of a tricky one where it's not so obvious. There is also the present problem that men with their mothers that can be needing to avoid them, like being really affected by their mother's moods. For men with toxic mothers, not unlike my last video, this is a lot of navigating that men have to do about their mother or navigating about masculinity. Here are some complicated societal factors about being raised by a toxic mother. And this is important. In addition to lasting problems that men can experience from being raised by an abusive or toxic mother, is that society and the community that they grow up in can reinforce detrimental messages that a boy is receiving at home from their own mother. How might other families, your school that you went to, those coaches that you experienced, the media and the culture also send messages to boys? In addition, most cultures are patriarchal and damaging to all, but how would they impact boys specifically? Here are some issues that you might relate to in context of an abusive mother at home. These are the things that boys absorb or they reject, but not having healthy modeling at home or outside of home. Think about these as like what an abusive mother can weaponize, reinforce, or confuse a boy around, or model depending on the types of mother that you had in receiving these messages at home. These are the double bind messages between an abusive mother and a patriarchal community or society, and we'll frame this in thinking of from Joe from earlier. Patriarchy says, like think about Joe, that might makes right. But to Joe, asserting yourself is threatening to an abusive mother. Be a man outside of the home, but don't, or be a man, but don't be a man. Another example is men should only be protective and selfless. But the mother can construe this as Joe not being available enough to her as a surrogate spouse. Hopefully you're following me with this logic. Another societal message is men always lead or know better. unless you have a mother like Joe's who is always superior and won't allow individuation or value a man's thoughts. Another example is women are overly emotional and shouldn't be taken seriously as an outside message. But Joe is conflicted as his mother is the authority on all things and emotions, specifically his. Another is men should have very controlled emotions or no emotions at all. They shouldn't cry. They can't be weak. Joe's mother would support this maybe as there is only room for her emotions, and Joe's emotions are a burden to her or threatening to her. Another societal message is be a man. That might mean physically tough and independent in society, but to Joe's mother, that might mean being compliant, non-threatening, and obedient. Another societal message is there is something wrong with you if you don't like sports, and something really wrong with you if you're not good at boys' things. But to Joe's mother, those things are frivolous. Like she only approves of things as her being the focus or her being the interest. So that's confusing for a kid like Joe. Another society message is men are not close. They compete with each other. Connection is for women or homosexuals. I'm thinking of really toxic, masculine, patriarchal communities, kind of like the one that I grew up in. Joe's mother might reinforce this as Joe having a relationship with his father might seem as a betrayal to her. And relationships with men are not really that encouraged. So as a little boy, what does Joe kind of do with relationships with like other men and boys? Another message in society is if you're not successful and you have a dominant personality, you're not a man. Joe's mother might reinforce this as constantly voicing contempt for Joe's father, his job, his flaws, and pointing out more attractive to men to Joe as a little boy, which is a complete mind F to him. So additionally, what if a 10-year-old boy like Joe were to open up to a coach in his life, or a friend's father, or even a friend about the emotions that he's experiencing or the physical abuse that he's experiencing at home? How would a man in a patriarchal community respond to a boy experiencing that? And I'm not saying that would always go south, just typically in the way I grew up from older generations is how would that boy be seen if he opened up to another man? What if it wasn't the mother who was being a bully, but another kid in his class and he opened up about that? How would an abusive mother react to their son being bullied at school? It really depends on the mother, but the reaction can be telling him to man up or to hit back. It can be an over-the-top dramatic reaction or no reaction at all or disappointment about it and making it about her. So none of that really would have been helpful at home or in the community, but it's also similar to how, say, the community responds with criticism or with apathy about what boys go through. In addition, what are the rules for a boy around other boys in terms of opening up? There can be safe groups of friends of like-minded boys can connect with, but what about the other boys in the class? Who is the dominant boy in a large group of boys? Who is the boy that the adult males admire most? Might that be the one who can dominate the others or support the culture and the community rules, like opening up is gay and dumb and you're weak for opening up? That's what I'm kind of getting at. So what if you're a boy who isn't comfortable with anything in the patriarchal framework or how it manifests at home with a toxic mother? When boys who don't receive help, like girls, they have to adapt. They have to hide. They just have to get through it somehow. And yes, some boys can buy into the patriarchy and lose their much younger heart space in place of anger, power, and maybe some entitlement. Some boys want nothing to do with all that and find themselves in what I call the masculine gray area. This is a really important piece to this video. From both home and in society, it might not be safe to be fully authentic and be assertive at home, nor is it safe to be totally passive in society, to girls, to boys, to men, or outside of the home, and you can even flip those. So boys might become more neutral or disconnected from healthy masculinity because they're receiving no modeling, in kind of a no-win that I liken this to this masculine gray area. And girls experience this in similar paradoxes, such as be pretty but don't express yourself in the way that you want to. Put more energy into your looks versus your abilities. Kind of like that. Lastly, what about the role of Joe's father in these societal issues? Many fathers are limited emotionally in abusive families. In similar cycles, and Joe's father does not really know how to connect with his son, and it's not a priority to him. So what does Joe do with that? Additionally, Joe's mother has claimed Joe to be her ally and her ally only. And the father, who is limited, might see Joe as making that choice himself and sided with her when Joe is probably groomed to side with her and have contempt for his father, which is also influenced by his father's rage and behavior, if that makes any sense. Kind of a mind F. This is the main issue with toxic families, or with the toxic parent, where the child is groomed to hate the other parent by, say, a toxic mother or vice versa. But what if Joe's father was actually a good enough guy, caught up with an extremely narcissistic wife, projecting onto her husband and child and really abusing them both and cutting off their relationship to each other? Those are not great choices for Joe. So for men, there is gray area. And speaking for myself, we as men often feel painted into a corner between meeting what society expects from us and reconciling that against how our mothers might have twisted and wrecked our identity as men, also in context of our fathers. Not that different from what women experience with one or both of their parents. Let's now explore the types of mother influences, that how a boy's sense of masculinity gets damaged, as it isn't always like what Joe experienced. It can be layered, it can be complicated, and it can be vary. So here are the types of toxic mothers. And we'll follow the same formula from my last video, where we explore each type, the impact on a son, and we'll also talk about some healing goals to overcome the toxic mother's impact. Many of these will overlap, but try not to get caught up in that, and let's get started. Here's a rundown of the types. There is the unsafe perpetrator or monster. A mother monster is profoundly damaging in various ways, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet. Then there is the non-protective absent mother, who is disinterested or distant. She does not protect and behaves as if her son was kind of somebody else's child. The third type is what I call the enmesher, which is the mother that puts her son in the role of her partner, and she will overshare, making him into a surrogate. There can be a lot of rescuer, victim, and perpetrator Cartman drama triangle stuff in this type of mom. The fourth one is the tragic codependent, which is super tricky, is the mother caught up in an abusive relationship, but doesn't get out to protect her son or herself. She can seek solace in her son instead of making really hard choices if possible. And the last one is what I call the crazy maker, is the abusive, disorganized mother who is immature, chaotic, and unpredictable. Again, many of these can overlap, and we'll get more into depth on each one in a minute. Let's focus on the three specific impact areas for sons struggling with a toxic mother. There's the impact on a son's sense of self. There's the impact on a son's mental health. There's an impact on a son's sense of women, the relationship blueprint. And there's the impact on a son's replication of those childhood dynamics and projections that I mentioned earlier. And after, I'll be talking about healing goals to achieve with each type, what might be good for you to specifically work on. Trigger warning with this type: getting the most damaging type of toxic mother out of the way first is the monster mother. She is physically, sexually, and emotionally an abusive, unsafe person. They are often ruled by anger, manipulation, cycles of mood escalation. They can range from being sexually promiscuous to acutely repressed. They can range from being mentally unstable to highly calculated, or even both. They can use their son, or men in general, as supply, while being victimized by them at the same time, real or imagined. They tend to not have relationships. They usually take hostages. They can have serious mental health diagnoses, substance abuse problems, or acute CPTSD. The son of a monster experiences them as terrifying. The relationship is extremely tenuous. It's hot and it's cold, it's unpredictable, while demanding the highest level of loyalty from a son. Most monsters are loud and blatantly obvious when we look at how they are, but some can be quiet and more subdued, where the monster comes out inconsistently versus in a constant way. Regardless of how the mother abuses their children, she will have an extremely damaging impact on a son's sense of masculinity. Additionally, a man with a monster mother can project onto his partners and confuse, like, say, preferences or boundaries as rejection. Like, they can be really rejection sensitive if you have a mother like this. He can also project that typical relationship stuff feels like to him like you're making him jump through hoops, or he found someone to make him jump through hoops again. He can be really sensitive to perceived rejection and can take that as a wound when it doesn't have to be. Some can become enraged and really triggered around conflict, and they interpret conflict as like they're bad, and now they're going to be punished for being bad, or he has to prove himself. Who maybe relates to that? Men with a monster mother can really give away all of their power and kind of act like a shelter dog, which is actually a lot of work for their partners or for anyone, sadly, and they can be highly reactive to just basic relationship stuff. Like if you say, hey, let's reschedule this to a survivor who had a mother like this, they might interpret that let's reschedule as you're worthless and I don't want anything to do with you. It's kind of just basic childhood trauma stuff. So let's move on to the second one, the non-protective absent mother. The non-protective absent mother is really tough to unpack because it really goes against all things in the paradigm in our minds about what a mother is and should be. This mother can range from never knowing one's biological mother to having a mother or stepmother in your entire childhood, but she is a stranger to you and vice versa. She doesn't intervene in any way about your life or growing up or even now. She doesn't protect you from siblings or from an abusive father. She doesn't maybe remember your birthday or what you do for a living. She defaults to your father or maybe other caretakers in your life from a distance about your care. She avoids a lot of parental responsibility or all of it. And when she is engaged, it still feels neglectful or off. She can show up at times when it's easy for her or beneficial for her. And oddly, she might shower you with gifts or praise, but that's her only way of engaging. She doesn't really know you or take the time to really know you. The absent stranger mother can be any of these. They can be totally physically absent, then you don't know her. She can be present, but she can be a stranger. She can be totally self-consumed and selfish. She can be emotionally immature, emotionally limited, shut down, and preoccupied with anything but her son. She can be disinterested or profoundly blocked and not knowing how to connect, could be due to her trauma. If she has childhood trauma, she could be highly dissociative due to her trauma or never being fully prepared or interested in actually raising children. I know that that's really painful. What makes her untouchable could be her childhood. It could be substance abuse. It could be her mental health diagnosis. And she can range from being really narcissistic to being really limited in not knowing how to connect with the son or anyone else, or even knowing how to connect with herself. It often feels like you might feel like, as a son, like a pet would be more important to her than her actual son. The absent stranger can also be more connecting with a daughter, but not a son. Here's the impact on a son. The non-protective or absent mother is really a mind F for boys because it sets them up for such a mystery in a boy's mind about what a woman thinks about him. Or that having a fully engaged, present woman might not exist since they might be more invested in anything or anyone but you. That often is a feeling that comes with the type of mother like this. The blueprint for women is that they are not attainable. They will never stay or choose you. Who relates to having that core belief about the opposite sex? Can you trace it maybe back to an aloof or absent parent? So the third type of parent is what I was calling the enmesher. The enmesher mother overshares, crosses boundaries, creates special relationship with her son outside of appropriate mother-child bond. The enmesher can seek out from you what she doesn't get in her relationships with men or your father. She struggles with maturity, and her sons tend to have to soothe her or be completely available to her, and she is the focus and the son is the audience. This type of mother influences a son about how men are disappointing, or she might idealize men or gossip about your father. It is an odd combination of intense intimacy with a mother like this while being also abandoned by her to her son. Here's the impact on a son. The enmesher can have a son whose sense of self is all about being available to others only. Reciprocal relationships feel foreign and uncomfortable. For his mental health, there is maybe anxiety about what is shared. There can be depression related to not being seen or known. There can be triggers around secrets and sharing and hypervigilance about information and relationships. There can be shame about boundaries or really loose boundaries. His sense of women is that women might be safer than men, but they really don't show up for you at the end of the day. And intimacy is about women. It's about their gossip or their struggles. It's not about you. That's like the blueprint. And with the replication projection stuff is a son of an enmesher can find themselves with women who are the focus. And he can possibly project feelings of being used by women or rage around disclosure or struggling with trust or feeling being used by women. A side note on the replication projection piece and all of these, I don't believe as for men that we attract monsters or we attract enmeshers or we attract absent people. Childhood trauma survivors were never protected from such people and it got normalized. We can even think about how our fathers didn't protect us from these type of women as men. When I learned that, that kind of blew my mind. But there is a difference in terms of like, it's not like we're choosing these relationships. The fourth type of mother is the tragic codependent, which is really tricky, or the safer parent who was abused too. This one is really tricky because sometimes women are factually completely powerless in abusive relationships with men. But sometimes the tragedy is that they kind of adopt powerless as their identity, which is kind of like what we're talking about here, which really isn't good. Some want to be seen as powerless, to be seen as a victim, and that's the one that we're kind of focusing on here. The tragic codependent mother behaves as a selfless bearer of abuse, real or imagined, and she models to the son to kind of take it from an abusive person. She never uses her parental power to protect or her personal power to say enough is enough to her abusive spouse or others. She behaves kind of like a co-victim with her son or her children, not a protector. A huge prevalent trait here is that she often operates from a broken philosophy that the abuser can't help it, and taking the abuse is the moral high road. So there can be some superiority in this one, and that change and breakthrough is either terrifying to her or isn't even contemplated. She can range from at least knowing she's kind of stuck to not even seeing it or the abuse to herself or to her children as being abnormal. She can be clueless, she can be martyred. She has a high crossover with the enmesher because she can align with you as a co-victim to the abusive father, if that makes sense. When a son tries to address it or get his needs met, she will say, well, you know how your father is, or worse, you see what I have to put up with. And that's kind of an abandoning, not connecting piece. The tragic codependent is the most complex mother to process in therapy because they are often the safer parent. Because they are also abused themselves, which makes it really tricky. They feel safer due to the usually being paired with a more blatantly abusive father who might be a monster as well. Here's the impact on a son. Sons of a tragic codependent mother, like with the enmesher, can feel like they only exist for someone else's pain, having watched their mother be victimized while the son isn't protected, and he doesn't know himself because of those dynamics. For his mental health, the son can struggle with rage triggers and hypervigilance about people not doing the right thing. That can be a very subconscious engine that runs children of tragic codependence. Might struggle with codependency, abandonment issues, anxiety about protecting others or needing people to change, can be enraged about people's cowardice and hypocrisy. Those can be big triggers in their mental health. Their sense of women, the blueprint is that women can be impossible barriers to get through to, or they might need the most help, like being the underdog. Women are there, but they're absent. Shame about not helping them enough, or kind of like sadness and depression and rage about not being helped as sons. The replication projection piece here is that a son of a tragic codependent mother can experience unconscious rage or disgust with codependent women, or they might feel compelled to support women no matter what, even if that type of woman is not good for him. Perhaps even protect them from other men. Sons can replicate trying to save or awaken a woman due to this type of mother, awaken a very messy codependent woman to get them to kind of be a mother for him. Also, this type of toxic mother greatly contributes to distrust of men in general on top of what the mother modeled. Moving on to the last one, the crazy maker mother. The crazy maker mother can range from having substance abuse issues to hoarding or general immaturity. She is like a child, but she can seem mature in some places, like at a parent-teacher conference or something, but she's really a mess in relationships. A crazy maker mother behaves in contradictions. They can tell you they love you, but they never show up for you. Their relationship with men are often codependent and highly dysfunctional. They make poor choices and are often oblivious to the emotional impact on her son. They can be impulsive. They can be dysfunctional financially and vocationally and romantically. Crazy makers are not always outwardly or blatantly abusive, but they often have overlap with the immature with their sons. But they can also get really nasty, however, if you push them around them being dysfunctional. Like, Mom, what are you going to get it together? She can become enraged and really entitled or superior in that. And due to her profound immaturity and kind of her runaway self-will, crazy makers have a lot of like unfiltered self-will, if that makes sense. A crazy maker no-shows to your graduation after just telling you they'll be there, and then act like it was fate's fault about not showing up. Not something that she dropped the ball on or that she had a choice about. They are incapable of accountability. She is incredibly hard to pin down or even maybe get answers out of. And growing up, she often forgot to maybe pick you up, for example, and then minimize the importance for you to be picked up or the impact it had on you, like not picking you up from daycare kind of stuff or running hours late to that kind of a thing. The crazy maker's immaturity is rooted in believing that their intentions are truth. They intended on meeting you and your firstborn, so what's the problem if they didn't show up? They can be really slippery and avoidant, yet sometimes weirdly fun and positive. They can also be rigid and detached from the impact on their son. So here's the impact. For his sense of self, a son of a crazy maker mother can always feel the burden of having to be her parent. And receiving help for a son like that can be really uncomfortable and foreign to him. Parentified children do not get to develop a sense of self since they are in a role of being the parent, not a self. The son can also feel incredibly not important enough for someone to get it together for him, like a sense of self was skipped into instant adulthood because the mother never took him or anything seriously. For his mental health, anxiety, shame, and stress, possible coping like overdoing it or people-pleasing, can struggle with letting go over triggers around being disappointed by people, and hypervigilance about trusting people. There can be also the deep shame like that was your mother. For his sense of woman, the blueprint is you cannot rely or trust women in any way, ranging into a codependent kind of fantasy about women that you can change women from immature to mature. For replication and projection, a son can find himself definitely in similar romantic partners, or they can find a good enough partner. This is important. But they still project onto that good enough partner that they feel like a loose cannon. Sons can also project onto anyone that they are a loose cannon and need to possibly control them, or project rage when others are either incompetent or feel like they're being manipulative because of the crazy maker mother's impact. You can be a son of a crazy maker and become extremely controlling and extremely disappointed in people. So a little bit about these types. All of these will have some overlap. Like Joe's mother was a monster, an enmesher, and non-protective, with actually a bit of tragic codependent in there. Try not to assume that one overlap or layers means that the trauma was more severe. I mean, it was bad enough, and it's all a mess, to be honest, and these are all tough, but it's common to have these overlap and don't get caught up in the severity around the overlap. There can also be varying severity to each of these 5 types. Like a monster can be sporadic and then be quiet. A crazy maker can be sporadic too and can shift into more functioning. A tragic codependent can leave and outgrow their identity and allow for some nuance to all this, but there's going to be damage in a way that the parent wasn't healthy in a consistent way. It doesn't have to be perfect, but these are big issues that we're talking about. Here are some general healing goals and ideas with each type of toxic mother. In all of these, if you're still in these toxic dynamics with a mother, seek out some resources such as therapy, if that's available to you, on learning how to detach from the relationship a little bit or the impact a little bit. Instead of, say, doing the same old with them or trying to get them to see you and still getting abused and still getting let down. When I say detach, I don't always mean going no or low contact. That is all a very highly nuanced and individualized case-by-case thing. The healing goals around the unsafe perpetrator, the monster. Try to stop trying to figure out the monster's behaviors and motives. They just aren't safe. And figuring out why they do something abusive doesn't change the fact that the thing is abusive. Our inner child wants to know why when they kind of need safety. They think the why about having a monster mother or any of these mothers is going to make sense or heal something when the why kind of doesn't. Try to work on recognizing the patterns of projecting the monster onto other women or people around you or your partner. We really will lose the person's humanity whenever we project something upon them. And this is especially true with the type of monster parent. Projection is all about doing a familiar dance with women, like managing her emotions that don't really belong to you, or believing an outburst is going to be about you or about your fault. Another is find tangible emotional anger and empowerment while exploring reclaiming your voice. Monster parents tend to rob us of our power, and we want to have our sons to have some power in their choices and their emotions and thoughts about themselves. That's the healing goals for the monster. The healing goals for the non-protective absent parent or the untouchable mother is process the abandonment that happened to you in therapy and find some healthy, tangible anger. Like holding this mother accountable is a thought exercise that can be really helpful. Stop trying to figure out the mystery of being abandoned. Our inner child wants to know why this mother abandoned us when they need the emotional help to process that they actually were abandoned. And again, the why never really heals. Work with your inner child about projecting abandonment onto other women. What belongs to your mother and what belongs to your partner aren't going to probably be the same thing, or projecting abandonment onto others. The healing goals around the enmesher is recognize that poor boundaries are not really that special. And there was a missing parental hierarchy and responsibility of actually having a healthy mom. You lost out on being someone's son and possibly became her surrogate spouse. Stop confusing your mother's poor boundaries or her irresponsibility for intimacy. It can feel special when she needs you, or that she wants to be gossipy or wants to be chaotic. But at the end of the day, you're still invisible. Help your inner child see that fixing the mother, means to abandon yourself, or trying to fix a partner that you found that is you're replicating. And the healing goals for the tragic codependent mother is recognize that they had the power to protect you on some way, or at least be real with you, despite how it looks. Could she at least be real with you about the situation? And was she truly powerless? Recognize that a mother like that modeled submission and not good, healthy empowerment. Do you struggle with that in your present life, or do you not allow yourself to be vulnerable within yourself due to that, having a mother like that? Work on not projecting rage of not being protected onto others. What belongs to your mother and what specifically is triggering you about people's perceived issues? Like, for example, if you're a son of a non-protective mother, you might feel massively triggered if a boss doesn't have your back on something, like that kind of a thing. Lastly, the healing goals around the crazy maker. Recognize that you've become the parent and you lost out on childhood being someone's son, being a mother's son. You might have just been her audience, which isn't okay. See the chaos for what it is, as fixed immaturity, not potential, and stop projecting that lack of competence or safety onto others. You might have to let people fail, or even see where they are capable and where they are functioning and not like your mother. Like, do you forget their humanity? So here are some loose ends to get out of the way. These are patterns I've seen in my practice of childhood trauma. Some will feel accurate and some won't. I cannot realistically name all the nuanced situations, and some of these may feel generalized to you or overly simplistic, or they might even feel too specific to you. And I hope you're able to eventually find someone safe who can hear your story about your mother and that you can be seen. We all need that safety and that safe kind of person in our lives to process the abusive mother. And there are many mothers like these types, and many mothers who are not like that at all. We are really talking about a specific type of parent. And weirdly to say it, there are many mothers like these types, but there are also many mothers who are not like this at all. There's plenty of good enough mothers out there who are trying to not bring this stuff, that they experienced into their parenting. We're really talking about a specific type of parent, and not all are like this. We're really talking about childhood trauma, which is a specific thing. There are mothers refusing to look at their childhood trauma, and they weaponize their trauma like our mothers did, or they simply don't know about it. And there are mothers putting everything they have into raising healthy sons. If you tend to distrust women in general, don't look for the toxic mothers as evidence that the world and all women are bad. You're very much going to get stuck if you're looking for that, or if your inner child is looking for that. Women are currently shifting, I believe, and they're voicing more dissatisfaction about their relationships with men in equality and hetero roles. There is a present transition going on, I believe. But I think, like in any healthy relationship, we want our partners to be mature and to be psych-savvy in a good enough way. Due to our mothers and our fathers and patriarchy, men are often taught that being psych-savvy and more intuitive emotionally isn't the work of men when it actually is. It's the work of everybody. And healing from a toxic parent not only means to rediscover our sense of self, but also reclaiming the intimacy we want from our relationships. Before I close, I want to bring back Joe. As a couples therapist and a childhood trauma therapist, I've seen men struggle in not being able to be in tune with their emotions or understanding projecting their abusive mother onto their partners. That might mean that a man skips upset, and if they're with an actually abusive partner, they are just maybe compliant with their partner while that partner just kind of dumps everything onto them like they're some kind of perpetrator when they're not. That happens to men too. Or that might mean that a man doesn't understand what their partner wants, and their partner is fatigued about trying to get through to them about emotional connection. Or that a man is stuck in only knowing how to protect and provide but not connect. Or that might mean a man is resentful and rageful about feeling like his partner is manipulative or isn't trustworthy when that's really not the case. A common pattern in couples is that I've seen is that when men are feeling like they're working really hard and they're providing, but their partner wants more connection, that man might feel unseen and burdened, and if not really pissed off about that or enraged about that, but it's often like they get triggered to having an abusive mother who just wants the impossible from them. So that's just a common pattern that I like people to kind of think about. So now before we close, let's bring back Joe from before. But let's also talk about Joe having a brother named Mark, who is very different from Joe, and you'll see in very different ways. Joe really feels caught between the gray area of masculinity, and he tends to hate all things like masculine due to the influence of his mother in society. Mark, who is more allied with his father, is more of a guy's guy and doesn't really think about masculinity issues. He just sees his mother as kind of a pain in the ass and his dad as being hot-tempered. Joe has gotten into abusive relationships that he can replicate dynamics about his mother where he is taken advantage of. But with Mark, he has weekly fights with his wife that to him will eventually blow over, and he sees his wife as just someone who likes to start fights over nothing really. She is always on him to kind of talk more. Joe, who has hit bottom with his poor sense of self and shame about being a man and struggling with that and messy relationships where he's always the problem, he starts to seek out doing some therapy work. Mark can admit that there's problems in his marriage, and sometimes he gets depressed and doesn't like to talk to his mother, but a lot of that is pretty normal stuff around marriage and whatever. It's just life stuff to him. It has nothing to do with his childhood. What might both men need to be happier? I know this is complicated by Joe being more open to maybe therapy or growth than his brother Mark, but regardless, they both need to process what happened to them as boys in their family system. I'm going to arrange this in 4 ideas here. One is reclaiming legitimate anger and grief. Anger is more of an accepted emotion by and for men, but not grief and sadness. These brothers would really benefit from being in spaces that jumpstart some grief and sadness and encourage both of them to feel the feelings of what it was like to have a highly provocative and meshed narcissistic mother and a very limited explosive father. Joe would actually benefit from being allowed to be angry. And Mark would most likely benefit to connecting to the fact that he avoids his mother, but also lost out on having a healthy mother and a healthy father. Second concept here is the courage to talk about the wound. Both brothers would benefit from the opportunities in therapy or in groups to share their story. How might Joe feel less shame by unpacking that he had no choice but to side with his mother and be her surrogate? How might Mark become more real about how, as a boy, he made the right decision to not take his mother that seriously? How might that be playing out in his current marriage from the example I gave earlier? Both Mark and Joe grew up in communities where to talk about what happened at home is to admit weakness. And it's weird, or it's even selfish to not be grateful for one's parents. Who would the brothers become if you could hear each of them say, my mother was an incredibly damaging woman and a nightmare to deal with, to the point that I don't even know myself, but I and my feelings had to go underground. The third idea is healthy masculinity. For Joe, what do you think his life and his mental health would look like if he stopped apologizing for his sex and his sexuality, meaning masculinity? What would happen to Joe if he carved out a version of masculinity for himself that could be both empowered and emotional at the same time? What would it be like to maybe date Joe, who is now more comfortable in his own skin about his masculinity because he did a lot of work around his mother? Would that be more attractive instead of just him feeling so wounded or kind of needy, to be blunt? For Mark, what would it be like in his marriage if he took his emotions seriously? How would his wife feel if he not only started talking about what happened to him, but started getting curious about her emotions, instead of projecting that women are just dramatic and silly because that's who his mother was? The fourth theme is finding male community. To be blunt, Joe has kind of surrounded himself with other men who maybe abandoned their masculinity too. He feels safe around other men who also hate men, but struggle to also maybe be a man. The mother wound around masculinity can cause men to join in like with other fall guys. What would it be like for Joe to connect with other men who are done being codependent and taken advantage of in relationships, but also embracing their positive masculinity? How helpful would it be for Joe to be around other men trapped in the selfless, nice guy thing too and working to get out of it? But also, what would it be like for Mark to learn from other men that it's okay to talk about your mother? Or to be curious about why you're such a lone wolf, even in your own family and your own marriage? Who would Mark be to himself if he could learn to be self-reflective and being so emotionally dismissive of himself and others? Here are some resources about this stuff. As a man, related to Mark and Joe's issues, the biggest resource that helped me reclaiming healthy masculinity was a book called Iron John by Robert Bly. It's essentially about reclaiming our lost authentic self, taking that back from our mothers in the context of what society also does to us, that is really messed up about masculinity. I really love that book. Highly recommend it. It changed my life. Also, I'll have some final reflective journal prompts and questions about dealing or healing from a toxic mother, and I'm going to have those in the video description to this video. A message from me to all the men who are watching that you can invent your own version of masculinity. No one actually knows what it is, I think, but we do know that our family's version of it and society's version of it doesn't fit. And don't forget that you're you, and there isn't anything wrong with that in any way, shape, or form. So that was a lot to take in. Thank you so much for staying with me so far. And if you want a good place to connect with issues like this, you can check out my monthly healing community, where issues like with all types of toxic parents are discussed, how to parent our inner child, how to deal with our triggers, how to not make choices coming from our trauma, how to know what's healthy and what's not. And we discuss all that and we work on those things. And you can check out the link right up here to my membership. And as always, I hope that this was helpful to you. I hope this was thought-provoking. Feel free to leave a comment, a question. Really great discussion from everybody around the issue of a toxic mother and the effect on masculinity, the effect on sons. And as always, may you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. And may you be joyous. And I will see you next time.